Hello newbies, this is JG1 Barton. Welcome to Rise of Flight. This is my introduction video to the two more popular free aircraft in Rise of Flight, the D5A and the SPAD 13. So let's get started. This is the aircraft that is a little bit more popular among new players because it doesn't have a mixture control, so it's really easy to start. In order to start this engine, all you have to do is press the E key. And the engine roars to life. Roars. Anywho, at idle throttle, the aircraft isn't going to go anywhere. Go over some of the gauges that the aircraft comes with, this being the tachometer that tells you how many RPM the engine is pulling. Right now we're a little over 400 RPM. It maxes out at 1600. You can do a little bit better than that, but not much. If you go into a steep dive without pulling your engine back, you're going to overspeed the engine, and you're going to find yourself in glide mode very quickly. Here on the bottom we have the fuel gauge. Once that gets to 0, obviously you don't have any more gas and you're going to go into glide mode. This is your compass. Useful for navigation. I don't need to say any more about that, I don't think. This here is your radiator. This is going to be important for you D5A pilots because when you spawn in, it is going to be closed, which means that there's no or almost no airflow going through the radiator while you're flying around, which means you're going to overheat your engine very, very quickly, and that's going to turn you into a glider. But even before that, that's going to give you a nice long stream of steam pouring out the relief cap on the top of the wing, and that's going to leave a nice long white trail of vapor behind you, and that's going to scream to everybody else in the air, hey, come kill me because I'm a nub. So, in order to open that, we're going to hit the right control and plus key. We're going to open that up about halfway, maybe a little bit more, about 45-degree angle on the vanes there. That's going to force air up from the bottom of the wing through the radiator and out the top, and that's going to cool your engine so you don't get that vapor trail. In order to take the aircraft up off the ground, all we need to do is add power. Go full power, add a little bit of rudder to keep the nose straight down the runway, or the field. This doesn't really have a runway. We don't need to do much more than that if you haven't messed with your response curves. Eventually the aircraft will on its own nose up and start to climb. However, if you haven't messed with your response your curves, you're going to have to fight the aircraft's nose to put it down in order to maintain a level flight at higher airspeeds. So we'll go over how to adjust that now. I'll hit pause because we're not in multiplayer, hit escape to bring up this menu, hit options, and we're going to come up here on this bar and hit responses. We're already there. And then the menu here, you hit the Albatross D5A, deselect the all planes responses for this plane, go to current axis drop down menu, plane control, pitch axis. Here you can see I've already got my responses adjusted. This is the linear line that would be stock. You hit the curve, and that'll give you a little bit of a curve, and then you just hit the down key here for shift curve, and that's going to drop the center of this curve down on this axis, which is going to give you a negative attitude with your elevators. That's the way when you have your stick centered, the stick in the game is going to be slightly forward, giving you forward pressure on the stick so it flies level and you don't have to fight it so much. And this is going to help out with aiming as well too in higher airspeed dogfights, so you don't have to fight to keep the nose down if someone's not maneuvering very hard, if they're running or if they're pushing negative G. It's a lot easier to aim when you don't have to fight the nose down just to keep the aircraft level. And that's going to increase your accuracy a little bit. It's also going to make the aircraft a lot more comfortable to fly. So once you've done that, we'll go back to flying. And the aircraft is really, really gentle. You usually have to put in quite a bit of aileron and rudder in order to maintain or to quickly turn. You can pull all the way back on the stick as I am doing right now and maintain a pretty good turn. The aircraft doesn't really like to stall that much, so long as you're not putting your nose up and losing all of your airspeed. Once you start doing this, then you start getting into stall territory, and this thing can be kind of a pain to get out of a stall. But in order to land the aircraft, we're just going to go idle throttle. We're going to put our nose down to come into the airfield. We're going to pull our nose up a little bit to regulate our airspeed so we're not coming in screaming like a rocket. And when we drop our airspeed low enough, we're going to start to descend because the wings aren't producing enough lift to keep us in the air. Once we get a nice descent rate, we're going to lower the nose to hold that airspeed and that descent rate. And we're just going to calmly, nicely, and gently come down into the airfield. And right before we hit the ground, we're going to pull back on the stick and level out and flare. And we're going to continue our flare through until we get to a 3-point attitude where our tail dragger and both wheels land at the same time. Use positive rudder control to keep the nose straight down the field and come to a complete stop. Holding back pressure the whole time to make sure that your tail dragger really digs into the ground and increases the friction. That'll get you a faster stop. If you don't control the direction on this aircraft when you're doing your rollout, if you just don't give it any rudder input whatsoever, eventually it's going to grab on one side or the other, and the nose is going to swing either to your left or to your right. And once it really starts to do that, it's hard to counter. You have to add power and opposite rudder in order to keep it from winging over. Otherwise, the aircraft's center of gravity is going to shift outside of the wheels as the aircraft starts to violently turn one direction or the other, and that's going to roll the aircraft over onto a wingtip. You're going to bend a wing, and ground crews aren't going to be too happy with you. But any landing you can walk away from is a good one. So that's our introduction to the D5A. Now let's go over to the SPAD 13. And here it is. Here's the SPAD 13. This is the free Allied aircraft, or at least one of them. This is the one that gives people, or one of the ones that gives people a lot of trouble with starting the engine, because if you hit E, unlike the Albatross, the engine doesn't just start. That's because it doesn't have mixture on by default. So even though you might have the throttle all the way open, the mixture isn't open, allowing fuel to get into the carburetor or the intake airstream. So the engine is still starved of fuel, and it won't start. So in order to start the engine, we have to give it a little bit of mixture control, and that's using the right shift minus button is going to give us full mixture, and we want 100% mixture on the lever here in order to get as much fuel as we can into the engine. I'm going to hit E again in order to start the engine, and there you go. It roars to life this time. But in order to fly the aircraft around it optimally with an optimal fuel mixture, we're going to hit right shift plus and drag that lever back down about 2 notches. And that's going to give us roughly our optimal mixture for this aircraft at lower levels. You're going to have to drag that back a little bit more the higher you go. But for now, that'll work. This aircraft, you really don't have to mess with the radiator too much because it does start open far enough that it'll cool the engine in flight. So this one does have a radiator that you can adjust, and this is your temperature gauge for that. If it gets above the red line, you need to open your radiator up a bit more. But you really don't have to mess with it unless you get up to really high altitude, in which case then you'll need to close your radiator a bit to maintain engine temperature. But that's another thing. In order to take this aircraft up, all we have to do, like the Albatross, is give it full throttle, keep rudder pressure in order to keep the nose straight down the airfield. And eventually we'll get enough airspeed that the tail will come off the ground and it will rotate. And then all you got to do is add a little bit of back pressure and the aircraft comes up off the ground quite nicely. Again, mess with your curves to give you a nice straight and level attitude while you're flying this plane. That way you don't have to fight the nose down attitude, but remember that is going to alter your takeoff and landing. With this, the amount of stick you're going to have to use with your landing and your takeoff. come back around and land. Pretty much the same thing as the D5. We're going to come back to idle power. Find that nice little sweet spot. We're going to pull our nose up to drain a little bit of our airspeed so we get a nice little descent, and then drop our nose just a tad to maintain that descent. Come down a little bit more. Come slightly to the left, line up with the field. And as we descend, to maintain our attitude until right before we hit the ground, we're going to flare, level out, and come down in a 3-point. Or so we hope. Now what happened is I got a little bit too slow. I didn't have enough back pressure on the stick, and I didn't land in an absolute 3-point attitude, and when my wheels hit, it bounced, and that threw me off to the right a little bit on my rollout when I finally did come back down, and the plane started to get away from me and roll over, and that's when I added the pressure, or added the throttle and left rudder. Again, that thankfully saved the aircraft. That kept the wing off the ground and managed to bring it in nicely. However, if you land in a proper 3-point attitude, which takes practice, and manage your nose, manage your direction on your rollout, you won't have that problem. Anywho, that's the end of this tutorial. Now you know how to start and take off and land in these aircraft. Go out and multiplayer, have a good time, go get some kills.